It wasn't supposed to be a Zelda game. For most of its development cycle, the side-scrolling action game that would become Zelda II: The Adventure of Link existed as a standalone project with no connection to Link, Zelda, or Hyrule. Only at the end of production did the team decide to attach it to the Legend of Zelda name and retrofit a story explaining why this looked nothing like the groundbreaking original. That decision created the franchise's most controversial entry, a game that sold over 4 million copies, won Game of the Year awards, introduced Dark Link to the series, and then spent nearly 40 years being called the worst Zelda ever made. These 10 retrofacts reveal how close the franchise came to taking a completely different direction, and why the Black Sheep sequel deserves more credit than its reputation suggests. Fact number 1. Zelda II was developed as a standalone action game and only became a Zelda sequel late in production. According to director Tadashi Sugiyama in interviews, development started with Shigeru Miyamoto wanting to make a side-scrolling action game that made use of up and down movements for attacks and defense, jump strikes, downward strikes, and high and low shield defense moves that weren't possible in the first game. The team was experimenting while producing the game and didn't really have the first game's systems in mind while developing it. Sugiyama described it as more like a spin-off, saying they were searching for new ways to play rather than continuing the series directly. Only at the end of development did the team decide on a story, determine that Link would be 16 years old, then attach the Legend of Zelda II title and release it as the second game in the series. This explains why Zelda II feels so dramatically different from the original. It was never designed to be a sequel initially. The side-scrolling perspective, RPG mechanics, and combat-focused gameplay came first. The connection to Zelda came afterward, as a retrofitted narrative justification. Fact number 2. An almost entirely new development team created Zelda II compared to the original game. Most of the developers who worked on the first Legend of Zelda did not return for the sequel. Tadashi Sugiyama and Yasuhisa Yamamura directed the game, Sugiyama using the pseudonym Shugion for his first major Nintendo project, and Yamamura credited as Yamahen. Shigeru Miyamoto returned as producer, but in a much more limited capacity than the first game, credited with the pseudonym Miyahan. Takeshi Tezuka came back as story and scriptwriter, but other key contributors like Koji Kondo did not return. Instead, Akito Nakatsuka composed the music, credited as Tsuka-san. This B-Team sequel approach explains the dramatic departure from the original's design philosophy. A fresh team brought fresh ideas, unrestricted by expectations to simply replicate what worked before. They created something experimental and ambitious, though polarizing. Fact number 3. Zelda II introduced the Triforce of Courage to the series mythology. The original Legend of Zelda only featured 2 Triforce pieces, Power and Wisdom. Zelda II expanded the sacred relic into 3 components, adding the Triforce of Courage as the object Link must recover to awaken the sleeping Princess Zelda. According to the game's backstory, a great king of Hyrule once maintained peace using the complete Triforce, but after his death, the Triforce split. The Triforce of Courage was hidden away in the Great Palace in the Valley of Death, sealed until someone with extremely noble character appeared to claim it. This addition of a 3rd Triforce piece became permanent series lore, with later games consistently featuring all 3 pieces representing power, wisdom, and courage as the franchise's central mythology. Without Zelda II, the iconic Golden Triangle wouldn't be complete. Fact number 4. The game sold 4.38 million copies worldwide and won Game of the Year awards despite its controversial reputation. Upon its release in North America, Zelda II became one of the most popular Nintendo Entertainment System games of 1988, with many retailers reporting that the game was selling out. Nintendo Power awarded it the Game of the Year award for 1988. In Japan, based on its cumulative score, it was the 2nd highest ranked game from Famitsu in 1987, only being beaten by Dragon Quest II. The commercial and critical success demonstrates that contemporary audiences appreciated Zelda II far more than later generations would. The worst Zelda ever made reputation developed retroactively as the series established its definitive formula through A Link to the Past and subsequent entries. In 1988, however, players saw Zelda II as a worthy, innovative sequel rather than a black sheep. Fact number 5. Ocarina of Time's sages are named after Zelda II's towns. The towns in The Adventure of Link include Rauru, Ruto, Saria, Mido, Naburo, and Darunia. Over a decade later, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time used these exact names for its 7 sages: Rauru, the Sage of Light; Ruto, the Sage of Water; Saria, the Sage of Forest; Darunia, the Sage of Fire; Naburo, the Sage of Spirit, plus Impa as Sage of Shadow, and Zelda as Sage of Time. Mido appears in Ocarina of Time, but isn't a sage. According to Zelda chronology established in Hyrule Historia, the towns in Zelda II were named after these ancient sages, creating a narrative connection where the towns honor the legendary figures who helped seal Ganondorf millennia earlier. This demonstrates that despite Zelda II's radical gameplay departure, its lore contributions influenced the series profoundly. Modern Zelda games still reference locations and characters introduced in the controversial sequel. Fact number 6. Dark Link made his debut in Zelda II as the final boss before Ganon's shadow. In the game's climactic palace, Link must face his own shadow in single combat, a dark silhouette that mirrors Link's appearance and attacks. This battle became one of gaming's most memorable encounters, forcing players to fight their own reflection. Dark Link would later reappear as a mini-boss in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple, then make recurring appearances throughout the series. The concept of Link facing his shadow self, or a dark doppelganger, became a recurring motif across multiple Zelda titles, from Twilight Princess's Shadow Beasts to the Four Swords game's Shadow Link enemies. This entire legacy traces back to Zelda II's penultimate boss, demonstrating how the sequel's innovations influenced even the entries that abandoned its gameplay style. Fact number 8. The extreme difficulty of the game was intentional due to hardware limitations and era conventions. Director Tadashi Sugiyama explained in interviews that various restrictions at the time led the team to implement the level-up system as a way to have players battling enemies repeatedly. The field map was narrow, so the simple encounter system added a luck factor. Sugiyama noted that the foundation of action games at the time was to feel difficult for everyone. Games didn't have a ton of content, so to have them played for as long as possible, developers felt they couldn't make them easily clearable. This reveals that Zelda II's notorious difficulty wasn't accidental or sadistic design. It was strategic padding to extend gameplay longevity when technical constraints prevented creating more content. Understanding this context doesn't make the game less challenging, but it explains why deaths feel cheap and progress feels punishing. It was the era's standard approach to maximizing playtime. Fact number 9. Zelda II is the only mainline Zelda game without rupees or currency-based trade. Every other Legend of Zelda title features rupees as currency that Link collects and spends to purchase items, upgrades, or services. Zelda II completely abandons this economic system. Instead, items are either found in dungeons, learned as magic spells from wise men in towns, or earned through gameplay progression. The XP system replaces traditional equipment-based character growth, making Zelda II feel like a pure RPG than other series entries. This unique distinction extends to the international title itself. Zelda II is the only mainline game that doesn't use The Legend of Zelda in its name outside Japan. The Japanese version retained The Legend of Zelda II, Link no Boken, but English releases shortened it to simply Zelda II, The Adventure of Link. These omissions make Zelda II an outlier in multiple ways beyond just gameplay mechanics. Fact number 9. The Famicom Disk System and NES versions featured different battle music. Players who experienced Zelda II on the Famicom Disk System heard entirely different music during combat encounters compared to those who played the NES cartridge version. The reason for this change remains unknown, though it's likely related to technical differences between the Famicom Disk System's extra audio channel and the NES cartridge's limitations. The Famicom Disk System version's battle theme was eventually remixed and used as the mini-boss theme in The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap, preserving that lost music decades later for a new generation. Additionally, when Zelda II was re-released on Virtual Console, the flashing colors during the death animation were removed and replaced with a solid red background in an effort to prevent seizures, showing Nintendo's ongoing care even for controversial legacy titles. Fact number 10. Shigeru Miyamoto considered Zelda II his least favorite game he ever worked on. In interviews, Miyamoto stated that while he wouldn't say he's ever made a bad game per se, Zelda II: The Adventure of Link was a game he thinks the team could have done more with. He explained that when designing games, they have their plan for what they're going to design, but in their process, it evolves and grows from there. Unfortunately, with Zelda II, all they ended up creating was what they had originally planned on paper. In another interview, Miyamoto called it sort of a failure, noting that all games he makes usually get better in the development process since good ideas keep coming, but Zelda II didn't experience that creative evolution. He mentioned hardware limitations prevented bigger enemies and faster scene transitions between overhead and side-scrolling views, which would have allowed them to do more with the dual perspective concept. This creator dissatisfaction is striking, given the game's commercial success and lasting influence on the series. These 10 facts paint a fascinating picture of Zelda II's place in gaming history. The game began as a standalone side-scrolling action title, developed by a mostly new team experimenting with ideas Miyamoto proposed. Late in production, it became a Zelda sequel through narrative retrofitting rather than intentional design. Despite this unconventional genesis, Zelda II sold over 4 million copies and won major awards. It introduced the Triforce of Courage, Dark Link, the Magic Meter, and numerous locations and characters that future games would reference. Yet it also frustrated its own creator, who felt the team never evolved beyond their initial concepts due to hardware limitations and time pressures. This creator dissatisfaction is striking, given the game's commercial success and lasting influence on the series. The legacy of Zelda II remains complicated. On one hand, Zelda II demonstrated ambition and willingness to experiment rather than playing it safe with a traditional sequel. The side-scrolling combat, RPG leveling system, and strategic swordplay represented genuine innovation. Towns filled with NPCs added life and personality to Hyrule. The expanded lore about the Triforce and Sleeping Zelda deepened the mythology. Dark Link became iconic. Many mechanics introduced here, magic meters, downward thrust attacks, shield-based defense, would reappear in refined forms in later entries. On the other hand, the extreme difficulty, cryptic progression, random encounters, and genre shift alienated fans who loved the original's exploration-focused design. The game's punishing nature stemmed from era conventions about extending playtime through challenge rather than content, but that context doesn't make the frustration less real. Miyamoto's own dissatisfaction suggests even the creators recognized missed potential. The series ultimately returned to top-down exploration with A Link to the Past, establishing the formula that would define Zelda going forward and retroactively making Zelda II feel like an anomaly. But anomalies aren't inherently bad. They're experiments, deviations, attempts to discover what might work. Zelda II dared to be different in an era when sequels typically iterated safely on proven formulas. It introduced lasting elements to the franchise despite abandoning its gameplay template. It sold millions and earned awards despite dividing audiences. It influenced games like Castlevania II, The Battle of Olympus, and decades later inspired indie developers at Yacht Club Games and Team Cherry, whose founders bonded over shared love of the game. 38 years after release, Zelda II remains the franchise's most controversial entry, lauded for some for its ambition, condemned by others for its difficulty and deviation from formula, and misunderstood by many who repeat its worst Zelda reputation without examining the historical context. These 10 facts reveal a more nuanced reality. A B-Team sequel that started as something else entirely, overcame hardware limitations to introduce lasting innovations, achieved commercial success despite creator dissatisfaction, and influenced the series profoundly even as later games rejected its gameplay direction. That's not failure. That's the complicated, messy reality of creative experimentation. Sometimes the black sheep teaches the family valuable lessons about what works, what doesn't, and what's worth preserving even when changing direction. Zelda II did exactly that, for better or worse, and the series would never be quite the same because of it.